Seen from a particular angle, in fact, seen through a very special lens, that is the lens on onboard cameras. And today's guest is Patrick Tambay. Good afternoon, Patrick. So let's take a look back into the past with some very spectacular pictures. But before we see them, one introductory question, if I may. I remember hearing footballers say that they were somewhat struck by certain stadiums because of the architecture or because of the number of spectators. In terms of circuits, do you recall having ever felt paralyzed? Good question, Laurent Frederic. Yes, it's true. I have to acknowledge that when you're on your own in Hockenheim on these long straights, almost on your own for 1.5 minutes, or in Monaco, just a few feet from spectators. Spectators are almost there inside the cockpit. Between the atmosphere and the pressure is completely different. But circuits should be taken as an enemy, something that should be dominated, tamed. What was your attitude? Well, you have to adapt to circuits depending on atmospheric conditions, depending on the atmospheric conditions of the day and the technical conditions that we have at our disposal at the time. I think we have to be constantly adapting to circumstances. And of course, depending on one's own driving techniques. Some drivers will know these at Monaco, others may be more at home in Spa, Zolder or fast circuits. Does one ultimately know circuits by heart, or will circuits always have the edge over drivers? Yes, well, we know the environment of circuits by heart. The road surfacing may change suddenly. An engine kind of exploded sometime beforehand. There can be debris on the track. So you have to be very, very cautious. You have to be on your guard. But the most experienced drivers are capable within a couple of laps of being at the peak of their engine's performance. They can really adapt perfectly to circuits. So theoretically, anyway, there is this automatic mechanism, but one has to be extremely cautious. Okay, Patrick, let's get down to business, and you will start the commentary. So here we go. Onboard camera. Where were you here, Patrick? Well, this was in Spa-Francorchamps, coming out of the stands, coming out of the pits. Obviously, I'd like to draw your attention to the comparison with modern Formula One cars. This was a turbo engine. This was in the 1984 season. The resurfacing has been completely redone. Just listen to the turbo engine and watch the right hand leaving the steering wheel. This is nothing to do with the sequential semi-automatic gearboxes we have now. In fact, they'll soon be completely automatic. This is also a far cry from the number of revs, 18,500 RPM that we have at present. So, in those days you were driving a Renault. This was a Renault Turbo with a 1500cc. The cameras were actually on the roll bar. This is a technique used by the FFA team in the very start of onboard cameras. They were actually filming. It wasn't just retransmitting pictures onto a television screen. Do you remember that particular day? No, not that particular day. It's very often the Friday morning on a practice lap. Not like things today with onboard cameras permanently on board, but maybe speeds would be, in the qualifying laps, speeds would be closer to real circumstances. This is just a warm-up lap, discovering the circuit, the very first stages of onboard cameras. Then we have our first experiences with Thomson onboard cameras. I was the first driver to have a Thomson onboard camera, in race conditions, that is. You'll notice that the Spa circuit is absolutely identical. This is the bus stop here. And over the years, the Spa circuit hasn't changed. In fact, the surfacing was perfect that day. Now, Patrick, second circuit. this is a circuit you mentioned earlier on. You quoted as one of the difficult circuits, Monaco. And here we have Alain Prost. Again in 83 with the turbo engine. This was the famous circuit, famous bend. Oh yes, you can see the rails to the side. You always get the impression that you're closed in. Well, the problem with Monaco is that you have to be spot on your trajectory, and with the turbo engine in qualifications in qualifying laps in Monaco, at the time the engines developed 1400 brake horsepower. At the time this was very difficult to do, particularly difficult with a turbo-powered engine, particularly in the so-called Lowe's hairpin. Now in the under the tunnel, in the complete darkness, of course, a lot of progress has been made in terms of the quality of the lighting of the tunnel, but at the time, well, it wasn't quite as dark as it appears on the screen, but it was nonetheless very difficult to adapt. One of the difficulties with Monaco is in using the Formula One engine was to manage the flexibility of the engine, the gradual acceleration, so that drivers that had flexible engines had a great advantage over the others. Now this is René Arnoux in front of Alain Prost. So Alain Prost has just caught up on René Arnoux. This is the 1983 season. Alain Prost, who, as we know, well, is very difficult to overtake. This is a warm-up lap. This isn't race conditions, so he wouldn't take any risks here in overtaking or trying to overtake René Arnoux. And the right hand that leaves the steering wheel to change gears. This was one of the technical features of the period, something that's since been overcome. Yes, I have to admit, we just wonder how you managed the time. It seems so easy nowadays, so obvious in fact, but at the time it must have been extraordinarily difficult from the point of view of wrists. Yes, wrists and the palm. In fact, Monaco entailed over 3,000 gear changes, and your palm was almost, well, you had welts on your hand. It was not just a matter of comfort, it was also a matter of efficiency. We, with our electronic management systems and reliability, or engine reliability, it was, well, it's great to be with Alain Prost here, who was one of the Grand Masters of Monaco. So, that was Monaco with Alain Prost, several times world champion. So, Patrick, we have another world champion, another threefold world champion, Niki Lauda, which a great treat. This is Niki Lauda at Zolder. Now, Zolder is a circuit that I have to admit has been somewhat fallen out of fashion. It's still used for the German championship, and the Belgians are very pleased to be able to drive on Zolder. Zolder was a circuit, well, which, for Grand Prix racing or Formula One racing had become somewhat outdated. In particular, it wasn't anywhere near the level of Spa, the new Spa circuit. So the average speed was lower, a very narrow circuit. This was in 1982, and in 1982 was the last year that we had a Formula One race. This is the year Gilles Villeneuve was killed. That's a difficult circuit, and weather conditions weren't very good that year. This is the Ferrari driven by Carlos Reutemann, just about to be overtaken. In front we have a McLaren, and the McLaren M26, maybe, if not, maybe Jemison. This was 1978 rather. This is Niki Lauda was on board a Brabham at the time. A very difficult bend to the right. Just a few words about Niki Lauda, maybe. Did you get on with Niki? Niki Lauda was a great champion, a very caustic sense of humor. In fact, he had his own way of perceiving things and seeing things. He's a very outspoken, very frank sort of person. Niki Lauda has a very dry sense of humor, so to speak. And in his current role as president of the Ford and Jaguar Motors division, he can be quite caustic. Okay, let's watch Niki Lauda driving at Zolder Bank. This was an Alfa Romeo engine, and his teammate who had just overtaken him was, I think, John Watson at the time. Carlos Reutemann, who was a teammate of Gilles Villeneuve at the time. This was the first season with Michelin tires, a very difficult season for the tire manufacturer, but a season that would nonetheless lead up to 1979 with a victory for Ferrari and Jody Scheckter, overtaking Carlos Reutemann, who left for Williams, in fact. This famous right-hand bend, which spikes the hair on the back of one's neck every time I see the pictures of this circuit. Now, when you compare these pictures with recent pictures, now this we're still in qualifying laps, there is very clearly a difference in speed between the engine revs, of course, but also in the way that the gearbox is used. It took quite some time to change gear. Now, let's move on straight away. This time we're with Patrick Depailler, another French driver, and Patrick was in Long Beach. This is another circuit. I think you have been known to say that Long Beach is the American Monaco. Yes, it's a very amusing circuit, a very poor road surfacing. And Tyrrell is very dynamic with the Ford Cosworth engine. Great pleasure to see Patrick Depailler driving his car. And this is a right-hand hairpin bend, which brings us down to Longshore Drive. And the McLaren M26 once again on the screen here, on this long straight with this very hard braking at the end. Now, Clay Regazzoni actually had a problem with his brake pedal at the end of this on an end sign and drove straight off the circuit into the wall at the end, into the protective wall. That was in 1980. Yes, Clay Regazzoni has been paralyzed ever since. Now you can see and hear the different types of technology in the front. In front you have an ATS, maybe Jan Lammers, yes, sliding. Jan Lammers performed very, very well in the qualifying lap. Now here we get the impression that Depailler is driving flat out by comparison with Lauda. It seems a lot faster. Could that be an impression because it's a city circuit, or because it's also due to the Ford Cosworth engine, the V8 Cosworth engine, possibly also to the speed at which Depailler is driving at that particular moment of the circuit. This may have been his qualifying lap. Maybe he got off to a flying start. He's really attacking here. He was in a little bit of difficulty on that previous bend. At the time, in fact, on this Long Beach circuit, the road grip, well, the grip on the road was not particularly good. Patrick is turning the wheel in all sorts of bends. His pace is excellent. The McLaren just ahead of him doesn't have an on-board camera, and Patrick Depailler is staying in touch with the car ahead of him. That was the time when this is going back into the pits. This was a time when atmospheric engines didn't have the same engine revs as they do now. And moving on once again, now over to England, back across the Atlantic. This is Nigel Mansell at Brands Hatch. Now, Patrick, Brands Hatch was a circuit I was on once in my life. It's in fact a circuit that impressed me most. These straight line, downhill. I must say I was bluffed. Yes, it's a difficult circuit for young drivers, particularly young drivers coming from the continent, particularly driving against British drivers who are much more familiar with the circuit. This circuit has all its secrets. This is the Druids Corner here. I had a problem here a few years later with the Ferrari in 1983. In fact, a problem that had quite a bearing on my career. So here's Nigel Mansell driving a Lotus. This is a turbo-powered engine. You can see the difference in technology straight away. This is the turbo engines that Renault succeeded in imposing, and that will simply push out the atmospheric engines, though atmospheric engines would win the day, once again by way of Renault's V10. Here in 2001, one can expect further developments in technology, probably once again as a result of Renault, which may well succeed in imposing new technological solutions with its, or with their, should I say, 8-cylinder or maybe V10. In fact, it's very similar to a flat engine. But this Brands Hatch circuit is very flat. In fact, Cheever had a bad crash here. You see a Ferrari on the screen here. This is a Ferrari turbo. And here's this famous straight. In fact, if you spectators ever get the opportunity, do go to Brands Hatch. It's very impressive. Okay, Patrick, once again, let's stay in Britain. Let's go and see the other great English circuit, namely Silverstone. And here is Jean-Pierre Jabouille driving the Renault RS10. This is a symbolic choice, I think. It was at Silverstone that Renault started its Formula One career. It was also at Silverstone that I started my career the same day as Gilles Villeneuve, in July '77. Be more precise. Now, this wasn't in July, and Jean-Pierre Jabouille on this type of circuit with the turbo engine, the teapot, as the English called it straight away, but with this turbo technology and on a circuit where power is primordial, Jean-Pierre Jabouille was very much at his ease. This was the Silverstone of the period. It's changed considerably. In fact, it was on this Silverstone circuit that Keke Rosberg would establish the all-time record for a lap, 259 kilometers per hour, which was the, at the time it was a former aerodrome with long straight lines. That's exactly the type of circuit it is, yes. Long straight lines, very fast bends that you take in fifth, fourth, fifth, and that you accelerate straight into. And with the ground effect we had in those days, the most efficient cars could just simply drive through these bends flat out, and Keke Rosberg broke an extraordinary record. But at high speeds, is it very tiring, or on the contrary? Isn't there something paradoxical about the fact that it's the slowest circuits that are most tiring? Well, the high-speed circuits, the cars don't have the same aerodynamic load. Now, that was overtaking Jacques Laffite's Ligier. But as there isn't the same aerodynamic load, they are very light, and it takes a lot of finesse to drive them, rather than physical strength to dominate the cars, as the case on a circuit like Monaco, where you need big fins and a lot of aerodynamic load. But the steering is light. You've, in fact, power steering, or we had power steering at the time. On some circuits, you needed to have very strong arms to turn particularly cars with ground effect. This was a long straight line, which was particularly favorable to a turbo technology. We also had to anticipate acceleration. You see the response time, the lag. That was another characteristic of the turbo engine, and which was a handicap for the drivers of turbo cars at the time. Now, it's all acceleration. This was a particular technique, which was quite different, accelerating out of bends, which is quite different to the technique used nowadays. Okay, that was England with Brands Hatch and Silverstone. Let's now move on to Germany, to Hockenheim. Now, this was the official order of the championship. Now, this is Didier Pironi, another symbolic choice, maybe a little cruel, because it was at Hockenheim that Didier would end his career. I think the accident was somewhere here, was it? No, it was further on. It was on the back of the circuit. Now, Didier Pironi was driving a Tyrrell with the Ford Cosworth engine, Ford Cosworth in '78. Now, on this circuit with the V8 engine and ground effect, obviously the gears are particularly long, And you don't really hear the characteristic sounds of the Ford V8 engine. That was the first chicane. We're now heading towards the Los curve, which is a very long curve that hasn't been changed very much. A very long right-handed bend. Now, Patrick Depailler was to be killed here a little bit later. It's a very difficult bend that you take almost flat out when your car was properly adjusted. This brings us where the braking before the second chicane, which has now become the so-called Ayrton Senna chicane. Jean-Pierre Jabouille just being overtaken by Didier Pironi. And it was exiting this chicane with a lot of mist on that particular day. And it was catching up on Alain Prost that Didier Pironi were just took off and ended up in the rail on the right-hand side. Now, before this long left-hand curve before the stadium, you always go up on the curve just a little bit before braking hard before the so-called Sachs curve. The Searle drifting a bit from at the rear end. The driver once again changing gears manually. Hockenheim is a very fast circuit with very long gears. Didier Pironi now catching up on a Ferrari, but he's actually pulling into the pits here. Now, as you said earlier on, we're trying to stick with the order of the championship, but after Hockenheim we go to Austria, to Zellweg. Now, the first question, Patrick, is, well, Zellweg is, I've always heard about the great Zellweg. I've always heard of it as being a very manly circuit. Yes, Cheever overtaking Alain Prost. This was a particularly big circuit in this particular version anyway. Here's the slowest part of the circuit, the right, left, right chicane, and now straight away accelerating hard and rising up to the long curves taken at 260 kilometers an hour, up to 300 kilometers an hour, before slowing a bit, back a gear, and then accelerating out at again 260 kilometers an hour. A wonderful experience. This was a long, straight line rising up. I think that was Jean-Pierre Jarier who just overtook. Oh, yes, that was Jean-Pierre Jarier. Very aggressive on this Zolder circuit. Now, this is what we call a subjective view. This is maximum speed before braking, before this long right-hand bend, which was also redesigned. Over 300 kilometers an hour, in fact. Again, leaving this bend on the bank is very fast, very close to the left-hand rail. Close to 265 kilometers an hour. Now coming up to two bends that still exist. They are exactly the same now. Two long left-handed bends, angled slightly away from the center of the bend. The second one is a little more difficult to manage. Now, flat out towards the rink curve. We now have two 90-degree bends to the right. At the time, you'll see this was a long bend at close to 260 kilometers an hour. The car was very light, and you have to anticipate acceleration in order to have the right speed coming out of the bend, and then use that momentum to attack the long straight line before braking very hard. Once again, this slower portion, right-left. Road holding was only average on a relatively old circuit, which was somewhat damaged by winter. Once again, attacking this series of very long, fast bends. A great pleasure to drive through these bends. Great source of satisfaction. You need a great aerodynamic balance to drive through these bends at that speed. And of course a lot of power as well. You can hear Eddie Cheevers here, who was moving into that right-hand bend. Obviously you have to take your hand off the steering wheel just as you're leaning into the bend. So you're leaning in with just one hand, in fact. It's true, that's the bank is the banked bends like that are quite uncommon in Formula One. There you are. You can hear the turbo engine play its tune. It takes a little bit of time to build up power, build up speed, and of course it was difficult to get the right gear ratios. Now, Eddie Cheever's in the bend, turning with his left hand, changing gears with the right hand, whereas nowadays he would have both his hands on the wheel. You just, well, the technology with the current gearboxes with the turbo engines of those days, that would have been a great combination. They were very, very impressive pictures. I must say it's very amusing. You're really in the driver's shoes. You're almost out of breath watching. But Patrick, just stay with us, please. We're just going to take a quick break, and we'll be back. Stay with us, please. I'm not going anywhere. With Patrick Tambay for this special Formula One program, but also a special program on onboard cameras. We saw magnificent pictures earlier on, but there's plenty more to be seen. Patrick, you've already seen half this program. What comes to mind about your thoughts on onboard camera technology? Not quite the same as the technology we have now. Was it better before? No, particularly now with the digital systems and the quality of transmission, the quality of lenses, and it's so much easier. The cameras are constantly on board with different angles, and when the viewers will take out subscriptions, they can, with onboard cameras, they can watch warm-ups, qualifying laps, the race itself. They can actually experience the intensity. But with this type of technology at the time, these were only the very early days of onboard technology with a lot of technical limitations. We had to have install the cameras manually. We had to attach them on the roll bar, and they could only be used for 2 or 3 laps at the start of the this had nothing to do with the way that drivers actually drove at full speed. These were only the very early stages. But it gave us some idea of how turbo engine cars were driven at the time. Did you enjoy having an onboard camera to see? I believed in this technology straight away. I was one of the first people to believe that this would be a great way of promoting motorsports. This would enable us to observe one another, and I was one of the first person to accept an onboard camera, a television camera, directly in race conditions. That was a later stage, on board a Renault. I forget what season, but that was the first time. Okay, let's move on. Let's enjoy ourselves at Monza now, where Jacques Laffite, our good friend Jacques Laffite, is on board his Ligier. This is the famous Monza circuit, a very, very fast circuit. Now, here we have, well, you can experience the atmosphere of the great Monza circuit. The first chicane, which was unchanged right up to last season. It's been redesigned since, and straight away, this takes us back a decade or so. I think we had the same feelings, the same reactions at the time. This was the first lap straight from the stands. A lot of traffic on the circuit. Jacques was trying to position himself in the field. A second chicane, right behind the Lotus. Quite surprised by the shade on the circuit. The lighting was very difficult to. Well, the lighting at Monza was very peculiar, and safety conditions were very different. A lot of improvements were made later on well, we built, of course, the sand pits, and the trees were cut down, and lighting conditions were improved, and of course the track is a little wider in a lot of places, particularly in the hard shoulders. Here you'll see that at the inside of the bend there were a number of trees that, although it didn't make the environmentalists very happy, these trees were nonetheless taken down for safety purposes. Other trees have been planted elsewhere. Now, in the parabolic, or the famous parabolic bend, should I say, Jacques was driving a Ligier Matra at the time with its 12-cylinder engine, just been overtaken by a McLaren M26. Now, when you've been driven a Ferrari driving at Monza, what's it like? Is it always madness? Is it always exhilarating? Well, I think no matter what circuit you're driving on, once you're at the wheel of a Ferrari, one of these red Ferraris, it's a very special feeling. And of course, in particular at Monza and Imola, even in Monaco, Austria, Hungary, the Italian tifosi are always there. They're always there in number. But obviously in Italy there's that much extra pressure. So Jacques let up there a little bit to let a faster car past. You'll see that the edges of the track have been changed over the years. A lot of improvements have been made to Monza, particularly on the second Lesmo, which we used to take very fast at 4th speed, but with the rail to our right, that was a major danger. At the Lascari chicane here, or Ascari chicane, you see the trees on the inside of the bend. It's almost surrealistic, isn't it? So here again, a lot of progress has been achieved. It's important that they continue to make progress, they continue to work on safety, but those trees were particularly dangerously positioned. Well, wow, indeed. Monza is quite an impressive circuit. Okay, let's now take, well, we're going to travel quite some distance to Japan, to the Suzuka circuit, with our good friend Nakajima, the local driver. That was, I think, the very least we could do. Now, Suzuka is a circuit you often hear of as being a very selective, very difficult circuit. One of the real telling tales of the season. Yes, indeed, Suzuka was a very difficult circuit, particularly with this portion known as the Snake, this series of fast bends. Now, always important to be at the right position with the right revs, the right engine speed. Very difficult to get the right combination, particularly with the turbocharged engines, and particularly in terms of gear ratios as well. Very difficult to get the right combination. But Suzuka is a very, very demanding circuit. You have to get the right combination of driving, engines, engine technique, driving skills. I think you have to be a really good champion to succeed at Suzuka. Now, the circuit hasn't really changed. I think the last chicane has been worked on. I think the idea was to, say, reduce speed before the stands. Now here's the spoon, the same type of profile, the same trajectory, and the same danger of understeering. This long straight line with the kink. Obviously technically difficult to manage the kink. See, you can't cut back too short. Nakajima knocked it back a speed, and then back to the famous chicane, which will remind everybody of a confrontation between two famous world champions, Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna.
Voilà.
Well, there you have it, Nakajima at Suzuka. Now let's come back to a circuit you're familiar with, Patrick, back in France with the Paul Ricard circuit, which for a very long time was the homeland of the French Grand Prix. Just straight out of the pits, this is the first part of the circuit. This is how the drivers start onto this little bridge here. At the other end of the circuit, this is the big 5/8, the Essen Laverdy, that marvelous portion. Unfortunately, Elio De Angelis killed in that series of bends. He lost his rear fin and was, well, went up on the side of the bank. So the Paul Ricard was shortened to 4 kilometers. Now here's the Devise hairpin. This is the circuit that saw a number of elf drivers emerge, people like Didier, Pironi, Alain Prost, Richard Delest, and others, and many others in fact. And here we have the famous straight known as Le Mistral. In 1983, I think I hit 343 kilometers an hour, but the Ferrari had its turbo jammed. 346. You'll see on the left-hand side the speed, the so-called signe bend, where you have to brake, then knock it back a gear. A very wide track with plenty of room either side of the track. This was the reference in its day in terms of safety. The Le Castellet circuit has been completely redone, completely redesigned and re-landscaped, so setting up magnificent infrastructure. You have inside information on that? Yes, well, I think the official presentations will be made to the press in the very near future. I think Toyota is going to establish itself in the former Renault and Williams premises. I think Williams and others will ultimately take up lodgings there to conduct trials all year round. The famous S, this is the circuit where I started my career. I've great pleasure in looking at these pictures. This is my first laps in a racing car. This is a circuit really worthy of its reputation, a great reference. This is the so-called École hairpin bend, right, left, and the famous Mistral straight. This was created by Paul Ricard quite a number of years ago. In fact, I remember at the time we used to say, well, in a few years' time we'll probably have grass here, and this circuit will be just, well, have become obsolete. Well, apparently not. I think there are better days ahead for the Paul Ricard circuit. The two right-hand bends, du Bossé, very delicate here. You had to head outside, back to the inside of the bend, one hand on the steering wheel, back to the so-called pif-paf, also a very delicate series of bends to manage. The left-hand hairpin. The left-hand Latour bend and the right-hand Latour bend before starting off a new lap. Okay, let's keep moving. Now moving on to Sweden for our younger viewers who may have forgotten there used to be a Swedish Grand Prix. In fact, there are only 6 editions in all in the so-called Anderstorp circuit. Here we have Mario Andretti at the wheel. A circuit that I don't think you know very well. No, Jacques Laffite knows it a lot better than me. In fact, we've just overtaken Jacques Laffite there, but that wasn't the year Jacques Laffite won his first race. I think he won it with a Ligier Gitane, with that fabulous airbox. I think just for memory, nobody was expecting a French victory. And in fact, on the rostrum, they didn't have the Marseillaise because they weren't expecting a French victory. So have you any great recollections? Yes, no, I was there the day Jacques Laffite won the race. I was a young driver at the time. I was there looking for opportunities to start in Formula One. I wasn't familiar with the circuit. Mario Andretti driving a Lotus 79. It was one of the famous cars with the ground effect. In fact, it was in that particular Grand Prix that they had the famous Alfa Romeo with aspiration. That was another regulation problem. The Niki Lauda was driving the Alfa Romeo, and he was disqualified after the race. For our more knowledgeable viewers, now, I think, yes, that was particularly successful at the time. And of course, Niki Lauda won the race before being disqualified. In all events, we have yet another world champion at the wheel. So Anderstorp is, of course, a circuit that has been somewhat forgotten. Okay, this is a race for the big-hearted. This is Montreal, another circuit you're particularly fond of. This is Patrick Depailler at the wheel and in rain. Now, not at all uncommon for to have rain at Montreal, so let's just enjoy watching the talents of Patrick Depailler at the wheel. Now, this is a good opportunity to talk about driving in rain. A few words about driving in the rain. Well, the track is shiny, it's usually very cold as well. Patrick is driving as though he were driving on ice, and in the first few bends he's trying to spot the puddles. There's a great danger of aquaplaning here. Now, Patrick isn't pushing the gears very hard. You can feel that the power tends to surge. The V8 Ford engine was a very gentle engine to use, very flexible engine. It's like driving on ice, isn't it? Yes. Now we have the hairpin bend at the end of the circuit that brings us back to the Jean-Pierre Jabouille chicane. You'll see the areas where there's a danger of aquaplaning. Now, a series of bends we're familiar with. Familiar with them because there's we always refer to Olivier Panis, who remembers these bends a lot better than we do, in fact. This is a circuit that has remained unchanged. Now, what about driving in rain? How do you react to driving in the rain? Do you feel anxious at all? I think it's one of the greatest pleasures that racing drivers can experience. It's also the most difficult conditions in which we drive. I think you have to be relaxed about it and prepare oneself psychologically for driving in rain and wet conditions. In fact, you have to overcome your anxiety. You have to, let's say, overcome the extra danger. You have to be particularly watchful. But it's all a matter of finesse, finger light. You have the former pits on the left. At the time, this was a very long bend before the straight. We have a right, a left. This portion has been redesigned. It's no longer just a straight. In fact, there were a number of serious accidents, particularly in '86. And, in fact, I broke my suspension in the right-hand bend in '86. And I spent the night in intensive care in hospital as a result of that. Now, you'll see as we go through the laps that by comparison with the first lap, there's a little less water on the track. The trajectory is being, let's say, rid of the excess water on the surface. So driving is a bit more efficient. It's also an evidence in the way that Patrick is accelerating a bit more. He's accelerating a little harder. There is, however, always a difficulty in containing the power and managing road holding, particularly with the danger of aquaplaning. So the drivers keep an eye on the shaded areas. If there's a lot of sheen on the surface, that means there's a lot of water. If it's darker, that means that there's less water, less excess water. So you have to be able to read the track, so to speak. Read the track to determine what your trajectory should be. Looking for, obviously, the part of the track with the best road holding. You leave aside the theoretical trajectory to get grip in the drier parts or the parts of the track with less excess water. These are areas where there's no rubber or no oil. Montreal isn't a full-time circuit, so from the point of view of adhesion or road holding, it's very much the same on all parts of the track. Whereas in full-time circuits, now Patrick's now driving into the pits. A pit stop here. At the time, the pits were algico, or temporary pits. Very, very spectacular pictures. Now, 3 more circuits. Time flies, hasn't it? Now we were in Canada. Let's pop down to the United States, to Detroit, for one of the numerous circuits used for the U.S. Grand Prix. This is Nelson Piquet at the wheel. Yet another world champion. Yes, what an array of world champions we have here. Now, Detroit is a completely artificial circuit. It was then changed for the for Indy racing. This is a typically American circuit, not as pleasant as Long Beach, of course. Braking down here, sharp right-hand bend, 90-degree turn, accelerating hard, braking again, another right-hand bend, again a 90-degree bend, hard acceleration. In fact, it's just a series, a succession of bends like that. Driving between walls, surmounted by railings or surmounted by chicken wire. It's somewhat monotonous. The road surfacing hasn't been changed for the purposes of the race. They're exactly the same roads driven on by American cars every day. Now, it's important for Formula One to be present in the United States. After Long Beach and Detroit, we'll see Las Vegas a little bit later on in the parking lot of a major hotel. Not to mention Dallas, of course, and Phoenix, which after a long period of absence was used once again, before being used once again last year. This is Indianapolis, of course, likewise a very successful race in 2001. Look at how narrow the circuit is. The IndyCar and the karting championships are held on circuits like these. Between the tunnels and the 90 degrees bends and the slide rails and the narrowness of the circuit, well, it doesn't make it any easier. Very narrow portion here as we turn back towards the stands, and on the left you have all the hotels, conference center, bearing in mind that at Long Beach or in Detroit, every time the Formula One race is held there for 2, 3, 4 or 5 years or thereabouts, there's considerable industrial development which plays an important role in rehabilitating. Wow! Ooh, oh no! It was actually overtaking Jean-Pierre who was just leaving the pits, that Nelson Piquet was. Well, we weren't expecting that, were we? That came as quite a shock. So, well, with an onboard camera, that's proof of the. Well, that was actually probably at the very start of the. In fact, Nelson was obviously very surprised. It all happens in a flash, 10th of a second. Yes, that was. We were very much taken aback then. Okay, second last circuit now is Zandvoort in the Netherlands. Zandvoort, should I say, used to be a very much used circuit. It was resurfaced. It's been used for Formula 3 races, the Dutch Championship. But it was created by Mr. Hugenold, Senior, who was also the creator of Suzuka. In fact, it used to be a great meeting every year. Always a very friendly atmosphere by the seaside, by the North Sea, with the smoked eels and great nightlife. It was very enjoyable indeed. It was one of the most interesting meetings of the season. Yeah. Well, the Formula One Championship has its charming events. Now here in the middle of the dunes, this is Alain Prost driving here. This was in 1983. You see the Benettons. This is the first lap of the race. A number of the cars I recognize from behind. I think we've just overtaken Eddie Cheever. Now here, in between the dunes, this is a very slippery surface. Obviously the wind blows sand onto the track, and I think Alain was fortunate in that he was able to have his onboard camera on a sunny day, which was somewhat unusual in Zandvoort. Now you caught a glimpse of the shade, or the shadow rather, of the camera. A long straight line before the famous Tarzan bend, the braking for this famous Tarzan bend. This is a bend that isn't unlike the Adelaide hairpin bend. A lot of overtaking at the end of those straight lines. In fact, Alain Prost wasn't always very fortunate braking, nor was René Arnoux, nor were many others, in fact. Another hairpin bend, a slow bend. before moving on to a series of high-speed bends, very wide bends, a right-hand turn then, driving downhill to a long right-hand curve. A very pleasant circuit to drive. Unfortunately, the circuit was subsequently remodeled, reshaped, with chicanes, not always designed as successfully as they might have been. Very interesting trajectory, very good speed, and at the end of this short straight we have a very delicate bend taken at high speed with a bump and a little bit of a valley that conditions the speed at which you attack the long straight. Important to get a good start to that straight. Beautiful circuit. And to conclude, Patrick, I'm afraid this brings us to the end of our program already. Let's go to Estoril. Obviously, we began with you in Spa-Francorchamps. Let's now finish with you in Estoril in Portugal. This is a circuit I've always heard of as the most selective of them all, the most representative of all the different difficulties and characteristics of the World Championship. Well, Estoril is a circuit that has changed considerably over the years. The surfacing used to be very poor, and as a result it was very difficult to get the right suspension adjustments. Very varied circuit between slow bends and fast curves, especially at the end of the straight with two difficult right-hand turns. That particular year the weather conditions were particularly bad. In fact, Ayrton Senna won the race ahead of Michele Alboreto, and myself finished third. In fact, I remember you were very happy to be on the podium. Yes, it was a matter of survival in very, very poor visibility, a lot of rain. I think the start was delayed. There was a lot of very low cloud, very poor visibility, very poor lighting conditions. So it was just a matter of surviving and staying on the track until the end of the race. And of course, it's always difficult to drive on this type of circuit with turbo engines, particularly with this right-hand parabolic curve. Are you going to do a Jacques Villeneuve for us here? No, well, I was going to, Jacques Villeneuve overtook Michael Schumacher there. I also remember Riccardo Patrese having a very serious accident here when he ran into Nigel Mansell a Sunday afternoon. He had the sun in his eyes and didn't see the black flag. In fact, there's always been Estoril has always been very eventful. Mansell lost a wheel one year. He didn't see the black flag either. Patrese took off into the air. It's always been a very eventful meeting. Always been a very eventful race. You'll see that the build-up of temperature for the tires is slow before building up to building up to better speed now. Catching up on Derek Warwick, who's just ahead of us here. Ooh, wow. Yes, Patrick Tambay was very aggressive, straight down to business. There's Alain Prost, Niki Lauda just ahead, the two McLarens. The two McLarens that were to win the championship that year. As a result of, or maybe because of, technical regulations that were proved difficult to manage. You remember the limited quantities of petrol, and the electronic management of petrol was much more developed on the Tag Porsche engines at the time. Well, that was wonderful, thank you. Well, I enjoyed myself. Well, this brings us to the end of the program, but let me ask you just one last question before wrapping it up. Don't you feel, and I'm very much the devil's advocate, talking about television, don't you feel that, thank goodness we had these onboard cameras gives a great sensation of speed. So when you see a race, you don't get that same impression of speed. But with onboard cameras, do you feel that let's say it completes the quality of television with digital systems and a special channel dedicated to onboard cameras? This is really a great advantage for purists and aficionados who like to follow their favorite driver. It's a great advantage for people who want to listen to the sounds of certain engines or follow the ways between Coulthard and Hakkinen. They use the gearbox differently in certain bends, and onboard cameras have also enabled programmers or video programmers to integrate the different World Championship circuits. They have also created all these virtual motor racing games that we now have. So yes, definitely onboard cameras have contributed to the creation of a whole series of new multimedia games and a number of new technical solutions. Did you enjoy that? I sure did. I enjoyed it immensely. A wonderful flashback, a great feeling of great nostalgia. So please, Patrick, anytime you like, you know the way. The door is open anytime you like, and you will be welcome here anytime you like on Motors TV. Motors TV, which will be straight after the ads. Bye.